When asked why people migrated, the common responses are better jobs, educational opportunities, family reunification, or fleeing violence and persecution. We rarely hear the threat of climate change in their answer. Nevertheless, the environment and natural disasters such as hurricanes, floods, famines, or earthquakes are major factors in human mobility. An expert at the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees recently gave a stern warning that the Earth's climate is changing at a rate that has exceeded most scientific forecasts. According to the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, in 2019, nearly 2,000 disasters triggered 24.9 million new internal displacements across 140 countries and territories. This figure is said to be 3 times the number of displacements caused by conflict and violence. Most of the displacements were the result of tropical storms and monsoon rains in South Asia or East Asia and the Pacific. 4 countries accounted for more than 17 million new internal displacements due to environmental disaster. India with 5 million, the Philippines 4.1 million, Bangladesh 4.1 million, and China 4 million. Human mobility caused by natural disasters happen quite frequently in the Bible. The most well-known biblical story is Noah and his ark found in the book of Genesis. Most children are familiar with this catastrophic deluge. Noah is said to be a righteous man who followed God's commandments. Other inhabitants of earth, however, were corrupt and evil, so much so that God regretted having created them. Thus, God decided to wipe out the entire earth with a great flood and start anew. God instructed Noah to build an ark in which he, his sons, and their wives, together with 1 pair of every male and female of all living creatures, would be saved from the waters of the flood. Many cultures have myths that involve a flood to explain their origins. Archaeologists have discovered tablets bearing flood stories from the Semitic people who live in Mesopotamia between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, mostly modern-day Iraq. 2 of the tablets are the Sumerian Gilgamesh epic and the Babylonian Atrahasis epic. Some scholars believe that the author of the book of Genesis was familiar with the myth of Gilgamesh and possibly adopted it for the Bible's flood story. Others argue that they were independent stories derived from a common language of cultural and mythological metaphors and images. Another explanation might be closer to the truth. The last major ice age ended about 10,000 years ago, causing the water levels to rise considerably. The entire seaside communities were destroyed. Some scientists claim that the rising water of the Mediterranean Sea reached a blockage in the Bosphorus and flooded a valley that became the Black Sea. This event, known as the Black Sea Deluge, would happen around 5,600 years BC. Other scientists speculate the cause to be a tsunami or a comet. Perhaps the memory of one or more of these great floods was carried over or transported into the biblical flood story. More importantly, what is the theological point of the famous biblical deluge? We are told explicitly in Genesis 6:5 that the cause for this tragic flood was human wickedness. Human rebellion, which began in the Garden of Eden, had escalated to an intolerable point. Humans had departed from their duties to be image bearers of God and caretakers of God's creation. So, God needed to begin afresh. Noah, who is blameless and righteous, represents a new creation or a new Adam. Thus, the flood story is really about how to make things right again to avoid another flood of biblical proportions. One would hope that the new humanity after Noah would learn from past mistakes and get it right. But time is running out, especially with the crisis of climate change due to global warming. Too much water can cause floods. Not enough water leads to drought. Global climate change is affecting our earthly home in more ways than ever. Extreme water conditions like severe heat and excessive dryness of the land have caused frequent droughts, leading to extreme shortages of food in many parts of the globe. In several African countries, for example, Somalia, Kenya, and Ethiopia, droughts have become increasingly severe, leaving millions of farmers without the ability to grow food. A persistent drought recently left nearly 23 million people across East Africa without enough food to eat. In South Sudan, almost half of its population, about 4.9 million people, are going hungry. Without any alternatives, families affected by food shortages are forced to migrate. Often one parent, usually the father, has to abandon his home in the countryside to go to the city to find work to feed his entire family. There is a global hunger crisis today. In mid-2020, a report from CNN said that the world is facing multiple famines of biblical proportions. The director of the World Food Program starkly identified 10 countries already having more than 1 million people on the verge of starvation. With the 2020 coronavirus pandemic and its effects, there will be an additional 130 million people pushed to the brink of starvation. When added to the 821 million people already chronically hungry, about 1 billion people will be in dire situations. The Bible recounts many famines too. The first one happened in the time of Abraham and Sarah. Soon after they had just arrived in Canaan, a severe famine broke out, forcing them to flee to Egypt to reside there as an alien, for the famine was so severe in the land. Another famine occurred in the days of Isaac. Instead of going down to Egypt as his father Abraham had done, Isaac was advised by God to seek sustenance among the Philistines in Gerar. Perhaps the most devastating famine of all was the one that occurred in Egypt in the days of Joseph. The famine lasted for 7 years. Through Joseph's correct interpretation of Pharaoh's dream, he wisely stored up surpluses to prepare Egypt in advance and save numerous lives from starvation, including the entire clan of Israel. In the days when judges ruled Israel, there was also a famine that caused Naomi and her family to leave Israel to go to Moab, a foreign and hostile territory. After the death of her husband and 2 sons, Naomi decided to return home to Bethlehem because there was now food there. Naomi's flight as a migrant was filled with endless grief. She returned home empty-handed except for a foreign Moabite daughter-in-law called Ruth, who insisted to accompany her mother-in-law to the end, saying, "Do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God." The Moabite woman turned out to be a blessing in disguise for both Naomi and the lineage of the house of David. The memory of her contribution is preserved in the book bearing her name, Ruth. The issue of climate change is highly politicized and controversial. But scientific evidence points to it as a reality. The human impact on the environment is a major concern for the 21st century. Throughout human history, migration and climate have always been connected. But in the modern age, the impact that humans have made on the environment is likely to force more people to resettle or migrate. Many natural disasters like droughts, hurricanes, floods, or earthquakes are more recurrent and attributed to the effects of climate change, which are now considered to be the key factor of forced migration. In 2010, a 7-point magnitude earthquake hit the capital city of Port-au-Prince, leaving 1.5 million Haitians homeless. In 2015, a devastating series of earthquakes hit Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India, and Nepal. All of them were 7.5 magnitude and more. These drove hundreds of thousands of residents from their homes. According to a report published in 2017 by Cornell University, events prompted by climate change, such as droughts and flooding, could account for up to 1.4 billion people who are forced to migrate by the year 2060. The report also predicts that by the year 2100, 2 billion people, about 1/5 of the world's population, could become climate refugees due to rising ocean levels. These alarming predictions should be a wake-up call for all of us to address the global climate change crisis today and to do something about it. We all must act immediately because the planet, our only home, is in great danger. Pope Francis has acknowledged this in one of his major teachings, Laudato Si. Laudato Si, Latin for praise be to you, is Pope Francis's encyclical on caring for our common home, planet Earth. That came out in 2015. In it, the Pope critiqued various human-made factors and symptoms that have caused environmental degradation and global warming. He called all people of the world to take swift and united action to save Mother Earth. Humanity is facing an urgent crisis. Because of our actions and carelessness, our planet has begun to look more and more like, in Pope Francis's vivid language, an immense pile of filth. The Pope sought to awaken our hearts, to move us towards an ecological conversion. A change of heart requires that we renew our relationships with God, one another, and the created world. We are all connected. God created the world and entrusted it to us as a gift. Now, we have the responsibility to care for and protect it and all the people dwelling in it. Protecting human dignity, particularly the poor who are most impacted by climate change and environmental disasters, is strongly linked to the care for creation. Laudato Si' is also a call to action. The Pope appealed to everyone to reject consumerism and resist a capitalist market that does not foster integral human development and social inclusion. Changes to lifestyle and habits of consumption can make a big difference. For example, we are encouraged to have a reusable water bottle, take shorter showers, take walk, bike, or take public transportation instead of driving, recycle, use compost food waste, and buy energy-efficient appliances. These are just a few concrete examples of how we can respond to the urgency of the present ecological crisis.